Welcome to Park Media. I'm your host today, Vince Emanuele, and we are speaking with writer-editor Cynthia Peters, who's located in Boston, Massachusetts, and also works with the group City Life Vida Urbana. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So tell us a little bit about sort of where you grew up. How did you get involved with this work? Give us a little backstory, if you would.
I grew up in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and in a middle-class white family where everybody that I knew practically, his parents worked for the federal government or the CIA. It was a very Republican area. My mother was a very liberal Democrat and very active, just worked really hard to overcome a lot of personal demons and a lot of barriers, and fought really hard against racism. She helped desegregate her college in North Carolina, Greensboro College, in the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
She's somebody who I think could have been a lot more radical if there had been different kinds of supports for her. But what she was able to figure out in her life was amazing, and she always sort of showed me what a fighter she was. My dad was pretty different than that, but I feel like my dad kind of gave me the gift of, even though it didn't feel like a gift, still doesn't feel like a gift because he still does this to me, but he plays devil's advocate on no matter what I think or say about anything, he just takes the opposite side. But I think as a kid, and especially maybe even as a girl, it helped me feel like I had a mind, and he expected me to have a mind, and he expected me to use my brain. He expected me to have an argument. He expected me to back up my argument. You weren't fooling around when you had a discussion with my dad. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of maybe what nurtured my political consciousness was, between my mother sort of throwing herself at really hard problems and trying to work on them, and my dad helping me think about myself as a thinker. I don't know, I couldn't help but start putting things together and seeing how the world worked, and figuring out that I didn't like the way it worked. I wanted it to be different. I wanted to plug in. I wanted to engage. I wanted it to be different on a systemic level, not just kind of a small fixed level. And I think I started getting to that when I started reading Chomsky when I was kind of maybe 17 or 18, and reading The Washington Connection and Third World Fascism, where he kind of lays out all, the US government's exploits in various third world countries. And I started thinking about all the people in my life who I know, who literally had been stationed in, Vietnam and Indonesia and these places, carrying out sort of US terrorism abroad, and trying to gel that I know these people, and that was the kind of work they were doing. And how does that work? How does the system generate this and make this possible? And I just started getting involved in political work. And
so what year is this? You're 17, 18, you're reading Chomsky. Were you going to school at the time, and where were you living? You still in DC?
I was born in 1961. I left high school after 11th grade, and I went to Antioch College, which is sort of a radical college in Ohio. I did a lot of, I think my brother introduced me to Chomsky, honestly. Can't remember exactly how. And then I ended up living in Detroit and working for Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which bit of a contradiction in terms at the time, the idea that the Teamsters Union could be democratized. And it was an incredible group of very disciplined, hardcore, thoughtful, very courageous activists who were actually risking their lives to try to democratize the Teamsters Union. And it was the early 1980s, and we had this little tiny cramped office above a drugstore. And I was, showing up there with all these Teamsters, we were putting out this magazine called the Convoy Dispatch. And I was just around really brave people, and it really touched me that the amount of hard, laborious organizing that would go into trying to make a change inside a union. And a lot of them were socialists too. And they had figured out, this is how we want to do our work. And I learned a lot from them. I'm extremely grateful, including one time when we were having a big meeting in the office, and I was a sort of this lowly intern, so I got to answer phones while the meetings were going on, and somebody called in a bomb threat, and I was pretty alarmed. And I went back to the meeting and I said, so somebody just called in a bomb threat, so we all need to get out of here immediately. And they all said, oh no, are you kidding? That always happens. And I was kind of like, wait, what? Wait, we're not going to leave the office? They're like, oh no. And these are guys who had been regularly beaten up by, Teamster thugs. And I said, well, should we at least warn the people in the drugstore downstairs? So
how long were you in Detroit for?
I was just schooled by these folks. That was probably about 6 months or so that I worked there. I did a lot of different jobs around the country. That was sort of my political schooling. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for a while, and I worked at a rape crisis center and had more experiences of how the system works and how to interface with the system. So in that case, I was advocating for not just young women, excuse me, that was a misstatement. It was all ages of women who had been raped, were coming into the hospital. Our rape crisis center was right in the hospital. We would meet the woman in the ER. We would advocate for her for the whole process of the medical care that she got. And then also stood by her side for the whole court proceedings and every step along the way. And boy, you see somebody who's just been assaulted like that, and then you see them basically get assaulted again in court. You see them basically figuratively get assaulted again by the police. I mean, you just see a person get renewed victimization over and over and over again. And that's when the system's working well. And I feel like in those early years, my late teens, early 20s, I just got a lot of lessons in the way the system works or doesn't work, and that you can spend your life fighting for reforms on a system that's fundamentally violent against people, and that was the quickest road to burnout. Honestly, that I figured out for me was that if I do this my whole life in this way, I will not be able to sustain myself. Like, I have to be able to figure out how to work for reform in a way that moves us towards true liberation. And that's always been the puzzle that I've worked on my entire political life, decades of life's work here. And I don't know if I've found the answer, but I feel like I've figured out a few things along those lines.
How long were you in Atlanta? So this is the 80s. I kind of want to bring us up because I want to get into all those lessons that you've learned, but I'm just trying to give people a sense. So you're in your early 20s, you're facing bomb threats, you're working at this crisis center. I mean, this all sounds like very intense work for a young woman to be engaged in, or anyone to be engaged in.
I think I really dove in because I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to be in situations where I would learn the lessons that I would need to learn to be able to do this kind of work well. And I'm not really sure, I don't know, to get you up to date, I don't know exactly the timeline, but I did a lot of these kinds of jobs. I ended up leaving Antioch and going to UMass Amherst because they had a Marxist economics department, and I wanted to study radical political economy. So I ended up going to UMass. I studied radical political economy. I left school, realized I had no real marketable skills except for waitressing. So
nobody wanted a Marxist economist?
I know. The whole time I was in college, my parents were like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. And then of course I got out of school and I was like, "Oh, damn, what am I going to do?" And right. I got my first waitressing job, but not my first waitressing job. I got the first waitressing job that came along, but I actually really lucked out because I was in Boston, and South End Press, which was a radical book publisher at that time, was only about 3 or 4 years old at that time. And I was, 22 years old, and they were hiring, and I went to the job interview, and I couldn't believe that my such an incredible dream came true, but I got that job. And I worked at South End Press for 13 years. That's how I met Michael Albert and Lydia Sargent and John Schall and all these amazing people who helped found South End Press and worked there. That's how I got to meet Chomsky and work on a lot of his books. And we published Bell Hooks and a lot of writers who were trying to figure out an intersectional analysis in the sense that, class tensions are not the primary or only mover of history, nor are race tensions the only or the primary mover, nor are gender tensions. But there's a way that these oppressions intersect and drive how society works. And a lot of our books tried to take that on. And that was a really exciting thing to be part of. I felt like it was my graduate school, my PhD program, my immersion in organizing analysis. And it was a real blessing to be part of that.
And to get to meet some of your heroes, which is really cool, especially when they're nice, if they were nice.
Oh my God.
Some of them turn out to be assholes, and that sucks.
Yeah, no, so nice. And
that's great.
Just such a great gift. I got, we didn't get much pay at South End Press. We worked our asses off. It was a labor of love. But we gave ourselves a gift of a sabbatical. And I managed to get us one sabbatical in my time there. And I used it to go and live in Nicaragua in 1989 and help a Sandinista publisher, sort of support a Sandinista publisher kind of get off the ground and move from typesetting to desktop publishing. So that was a little bit of international solidarity that I did. I spent a year living in Managua, kind of immersed in that historical moment.
What was that like?
Well, it was an odd time to be there, honestly. The election happened in February 1990, and the Sandinistas lost. And Violeta Chamorro won, the US candidate won. And the country was just on its knees, honestly, from the whole long protracted, covert war, not so covert war against it. I'm pretty sure it was a textbook example of the country just being tired of having the United States, basically with its boot on its neck for all those years, just draining the country of everything. And so people just voted basically for the war to end. And so they voted in the US candidate and the war ended, Mm-hmm. So it was a really remarkable time to be there. Very sad, heartbreaking time. This was a revolution that had a lot of promise. They overthrew a horrible US-backed dictator, Somoza, and then tried a lot of experiments and ultimately failed because the US just would not let a good example exist in its backyard. Right. It's just not allowed to happen. So it had to be squashed. Yeah. So it was a sad time, a hard time, learned a lot, came back to this country, with renewed commitment to organize in the US to stop the US from being the self-nominated rogue cop of the world. It's just that I already knew that was my mission, but it just came back, with that even more so ingrained.
So tell me about the 90s. What kind of activism organizing is happening during this period? When did South End Press end?
A few years ago, they closed up shop. So it kept going, for a few more years. I left in 1996, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Were you staying still in Boston at that time?
Yeah, I've been in Boston since 1981 or something.
Okay.
Except for when I was. In the 90s, I did a lot of anti-war work, the first Gulf War, anti-militarism work, work in the city of Boston. I did a lot of work trying to connect the war at home with the war abroad. There's a huge disconnect between the anti-war movement and people engaged in fighting against the war at home. What you might call, poverty, domestic racism, domestic violence that's occurring here in our own society. So we have a bit of a divide between the people who do anti-militarism work and people who do war at home work. And one of my big goals in the anti-work that I was doing was to try to connect the two wars more, and to connect the activism, and to try to figure out what's going on here, that these two movements can't speak to each other better. Yeah, I'm not sure what we figured out. We tried a lot of things, but that was one of the main focuses of my work at that time. I also worked at 1199, the Healthcare Workers Union, at that time, and I started teaching English as a second language to workers in that union, and got involved in union stuff that way. I became a parent in the 90s. I started writing a lot about capitalism and parenting. It's amazing when you become a parent, when you notice the ways that capitalism wants to turn parenting into a consumption activity, basically. So I tried to write a lot about that. Like, the way to be a good parent is to have these right products. It's to consume these pieces of advice and then upchuck them back out at your kid in a certain way, this many times a day, that many times a week. It's not about building community or kind of having a horizontal nature of parenting that actually could kind of support people to do a good job and to be present for their kids. It's more about directing your energy as a parent towards some consumable parenting item,
right?
Right. And it's very distracting and very harming for parents, because it's very isolating. It kind of puts you and your kid and your consumption activities in this little bubble, and that's it right there. Not being connected to your neighborhood or other parents or kids. So I did a lot of writing about that in the 90s. It was kind of one of my main focuses then.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think of my friends who are parents, and the tremendous amount of stress that's placed on them, not just from obviously the system, but then what that creates in the social relations, where then they have to deal with maybe other children who are like, well, why do you have those shoes? Those shoes are ugly and they're old. Or even other parents that are like, hey, this is supposed to be the best thing for babies right now, but it costs $280 or whatever it is. All that kind of, just the amount of stress that puts on people, which really, I don't know, it kind of eats away at your, your confidence, your self-worth. And that's,
Yeah, capitalism is really good at doing that. It undermines your confidence, doing something that's a very potentially kind of natural thing where your own inner wisdom could be there for you. But capitalism makes you insecure about your abilities and then sells you a product to fix it. Right? That's what it does over and over and over again. You're not good enough. Here's the product you need to buy to be good enough. It strips you down and then builds you up if you purchase something. Of course, it doesn't work, but we keep trying over and over again,
Right. And so you have a young child. It's the late 90s. Do you have just one child, or do you have two children? What are you doing when 9/11 happens?
Oh yeah. Well, I was very involved in the protests that were happening against the World Trade Organization, against the World Bank. There was a huge movement of people coming up, Teamsters and Turtles together in Seattle, organizing against these free trade agreements. So I was involved in that. I had been going to a lot of protests. I went down to DC. I told you the story about being at that World Bank demo in DC, where we saw two guys escalate the protest really violently by starting to break windows. And then we saw those same two guys a few minutes later, a few blocks away, arresting people. So, clearly cops that, escalated the situation and then turned around and started handcuffing people. So I'd never seen that with my own eyes. I clearly read a lot about COINTELPRO. I'd read a lot about, the infiltration even of the Central America Solidarity Movement. But I'd never seen with my own eyes that happening. So that was pretty powerful. But yeah, I was involved in those movements. I had two small children in the 90s. I was pretty busy with that. I 9/11 happened, and we immediately started a neighborhood-based kind of anti-war group that was basically trying to call for people to come together to call on Bush not to invade Afghanistan. I was writing lots. I was speaking at a lot of events. We were holding big meetings. I remember my daughter at one point, she was probably about 10. She came marching up to me and she just wanted to know. She said, "What are you doing to stop this war?" I mean, we always debated how much to like pull her in. I mean, they both came to our meetings. They came to everything. They were part of everything. I mean, we didn't, they were just sitting under the table drawing or something, I don't know how much they were listening but they were with us a lot, and so they heard a lot. And anyway, she got real upset about it and marched into the room and demanded to know what I was doing about it. It was kind of great. It was actually, what are the grownups around here doing? Is anybody doing anything, And I said, "Honey, what, you've seen us, like you've seen us. It's all we're doing, night and day. Like, what do you mean? What are we doing?" She goes, "Well, aren't you going to go to the White House, or aren't you going to at least go to Washington and tell them, And I said, "Well, I mentioned, look, you've seen the meetings." Or she goes, "Mom, that's a meeting. You're having a meeting. Like, how's that going to do anything?" And it was a brilliant observation, really. I think it's kind of a really great question for organizers. The feeling often when our government is about to, for example, start bombing Afghanistan, and the prospect of millions of people either dying in bombings or dying from starvation afterwards is something you're facing. There's a deep, almost physical feeling about that, right? Like a fight or flight. You want to do something extreme to make it stop. And yet the task at hand is to hold a meeting, to try to get people together, to try to get unity, to then be stronger, to be able to have an effect. But the disconnect between that fight or flight urgency, that feeling of mayhem is about to happen, and I'm, as a US citizen, partly responsible, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a meeting. It's still something that I struggle with all the time. The urgency, the lives that are at stake, and the thing in front of me to do is to have a meeting, to try to bring people together, to try to build towards a strong response. It's hard. It's hard. I almost can't bear it sometimes. My body, it's not what I want to do.
I understand.
It's no match for what they're doing to us.
Yeah. No, I understand. But if you don't build that collectivity, if you don't build that unity, and you don't have a clear vision and a strategy of what you want to get, then you can get out there and do whatever you want, but you're going to keep banging your head against the wall, which is also a nice path to burnout for people. I mean, both ways. It's either like, I've seen burnout from inaction, and I've seen burnout from people just doing action after action after action with no sense of where those are supposed to go, what they're hoping to achieve, etc. What do you think are some of the, I was too young at the time, graduated high school in 2002, was a senior when 9/11 happened, joined the Marine Corps immediately following, end up in Iraq during the initial invasion in 2003. So I really like to, and I didn't get home until 2006, joined the anti-war movement in 2006, but there's a whole period of time there that, especially during those major mobilizations and organizing efforts, that I really like to talk to people who are from that era and kind of ask them, what do you think, twofold, what do you think are some of the good things that you saw during that era that we should maybe replicate now? And what are the things that you would maybe do differently that you think we can build on?
In the anti-war work?
In the anti-war work that was happening at that time, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, the bridges to communities of color that we were able to build here, that was really important. The anti-war movement is by no means all white, but it seems to largely be white. And I think there's a perception that there's racism in the anti-war movement. And the way I've heard it expressed is that, who are these white people in these comfortable suburbs suddenly getting upset about a war happening 4,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
There's a war happening right here in Roxbury. Black people are getting killed right here, and you're not paying any attention to that, and you never have, and you've never shown up, and you haven't donated money, and you haven't, put your resources into this battle happening right in your backyard, but you're willing to step out for a war happening way over there. What's up with that? It looks like racism to me, mm-hmm. Right? So that was the criticism. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so trying to get privileged people who are willing to be anti-war, it's not all privileged people, mind you, so I know you know that. But the privileged people who do step up, who do a lot of the writing, who get the op-eds published, who have resources, for them to actually think about what's functioning about our democracy here at home. what part of our democracy here at home is actually working? It's too comfortable to criticize Saddam Hussein's lack of democracy, when you're presiding over, and a lot of you are white kind of privileged gatekeepers in this world here in the US. And what are you doing to kind of continue the way the system works here at home? So getting, working across that division was, I think, something that a lot of people tried to do. And sometimes it worked well and sometimes it didn't work that well, but it's a really important piece of all of our movements. Like right now, all of our movements need to be addressing anti-militarism and bringing anti-militarism in. And it's just very hard to get ourselves to work across silos, in my experience.
100%. How about, what are you thinking? It's like, say 2006, I get out, I see the Democrats take the House and the Senate overwhelmingly. The conversation at the time in the liberal press was that the Democratic Party was the new PRI of the United States, that they were going to be in power forever, that the demographic changes were here, and that the Republican Party was dead. I remember the broadcasts on MSNBC like they were yesterday. I was young, just getting involved, had just voted for John Kerry as an absentee ballot while sitting in a sea hut in Iraq, thinking that was, I thought I was radical at the time because everybody around me was telling me that I was like a liberal piece of shit and all this. So I'm like, yeah, you're damn right I'm a liberal, Get home in 06, sort of immediately become radicalized with IVAW, but still had a hope. I was like hoping that this, the Democrats taking the House and Senate, that maybe they would cut off funding for the war. I personally at that time was seeing that we didn't have as much of a strategic approach to electoral politics as we should have had. I mean, a lot of my friends who weren't in the anti-war movement were involved with those efforts, but a lot of my friends in the anti-war movement, I think, if one of our major demands would have been to stop the funding and then had a strategic approach to reach out, pressure those Democratic politicians, because some of them indeed did support cutting off the funding, but just not enough. But I was going to anti-war meetings at that time and people would be like, we need to dismantle U.S. empire and end imperialism. And I was like, yes, like I agree with this. And I'm like, how are we going to do that? Step by step, piece by piece, like what does that look like? So that was like some of the stuff that I was thinking at the time was very sort of beaten down by the time the 2008 election took place. In fact, I think the only reason I showed up to vote that year was because I had a friend from the civil rights movement who said, Vince, what this would mean to those of us who had fought for civil rights over the years to have the first black president, that this would be really a monumental thing, if only for symbolic reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And and these days I have a much different view of just like strategic voting. It's a tactic. It's a form of harm reduction. This is what we need to do at its worst, of course. But yeah, what are you thinking during that time? Like, you're a seasoned activist organizer at that time, like had been around a lot of movements. Where was your head at? What was your work at by the time Obama takes office or is running for office? It's 2008 now. The financial collapse is happening,
I think by then I had been very involved in city life organizing. They're a housing justice organization here in Boston. I just want to, going back to the war, I want to say one thing, another mistake that we made, which is when the framing is stop the war, Like, we have to stop the war. We have to stop the war at all costs. And I was in New York at that huge protest that happened right on the eve of the Iraq War. In fact, me and my kids got almost trampled by horses during that. It was very intense. It was the first time I've ever protested inside what they call pens and chutes. They blocked off parts of city blocks and they put pens. They created pens, and a chute would let you into the pen. And then they kept all the side streets open, and so each block had a pen, and you had to protest inside the pen. It was really, it's a whole new kind of protest where they're, but when your demand is stop the war, and then you fail to stop the war, a lot of people go home discouraged. Oh, we failed to stop the war, and now we don't know what to do with ourselves. Yeah. So one thing as organizers we have to do is think about, what is our demand? How are we nurturing people to stay in for the long haul, not just give up when we don't get the thing that we said we wanted, but have we, sometimes you can lose the thing you're demanding, but if you can build in the process a movement that's strong enough to keep going, then you can do things like hold Obama accountable. I mean, to me, that was the thing that even Obama said to people. He said, hold me accountable. Like, when I'm in office, I'm going to have pressures on me from the banks, Mm-hmm. And I mean, I never had any delusion that he was going to be a very progressive candidate. He was obviously a corporate candidate, but if our movements were strong enough to push him to the left, then we could have pushed him to the left. Same as we can push practically any politician to the left if our movements are strong enough. So, I don't know, for elections, I do believe in kind of an inside-outside strategy. I think it's helpful for down ballot people to get elected who have a strong progressive voice. I think that's meaningful. But I think what's most meaningful is strong grassroots forces that make it impossible for politicians to not do what we want. And that's the way we get power. And that's what we have to keep fighting for. And too often we're just too undisciplined. We, rally around the election every 4 years, and the unions mobilize, and they send people to Pennsylvania and New Hampshire and Florida to knock on doors, and they spend all this money and they do all this work. And then the election ends, and then it's a kind of over with.
Right.
Instead of staying at that fever pitch. Now what? Now how do we keep him accountable? So it's just a real misreading of how the U.S. works and how U.S. politics works, to then sit down afterwards. That's exactly when we need to stay mobilized,
Right. No, it was one of my primary concerns with the Bernie campaign. We were working on the Bernie campaign pretty heavily out here, and it seemed to me that there was going to come a time. I mean, we had regularly talked about it through the events, through different meetings and strategy sessions, but it seemed to me that there was going to come a time, say maybe over the summer, let's say the pandemic didn't happen and he ended up the nominee, that we were going to have to start having the sort of discussions that I think I didn't hear during the Obama years, or when Obama, say, first got elected. And that is that, like, exactly what you just said. How do we stay here? How do we keep pressuring? Maybe in the case of Bernie, the difference might have been you're going to have to sort of defend part of the project. So we have to push him on issues where he's not good enough, or maybe he's, we need to push him to be better. But then also the things that he was going to offer, it was going to be a really interesting moment for the left and for progressives to be in this position where you have someone in power. You're not just pushing them to do better, but you're actually defending part of their project as well. So if indeed he proposed the Medicare for All legislation, like, that was something that we had to not push him on, but to, like, defend that project, push it, amongst the other elected officials. And I don't want to sort of rehash the Obama years, because we'll do that with other guests as well. So kind of bring us up to Donald Trump gets elected. You're living in Boston. What are you thinking for the last 3 or 4 years? And then sort of, bring us up to today, if you would, in terms of your activism, but also your thinking about where we're at, what needs to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I remember at City Life having a conversation with people about, what are we going to do if Trump is elected? How is it going to change our work? And we just kind of realized, it's not really going to change our work. We have the same work. We have the same mission that we had before, which is to build a radical, mobilized base of people from the grassroots to develop their leadership, their ability to be cadre in the struggle. And, that's our job. That's our job right now. And that's still our job. And that's been our job all along. And, City Life is a great example of a base building organization. I think too many of our progressive organizations aren't thinking well enough about how to build their base at the same time that they launch themselves at the cruelties of the machine, right? Mm-hmm. So City Life is very good at figuring out, how do we take on this battle in a way that meets the needs of regular people right now. And in our case, what that means is keeps them in their homes, improves the conditions of their homes, prevents them from being evicted, things like that. And how do we do that? And how do we pick those battles? And how do we fight those battles in a way that builds a powerful, mobilized base? And so City Life has this organizing strategy, which I'll share with you. It's called the sword and the shield. And, I once had one of my ESL students was telling me about how his father taught him how you fight a lion. And I said, wow, how do you fight a lion? And he said, well, my father taught me you need a spear and a shield. And I immediately thought of City Life. I was like, oh, that sounds like our organizing strategy. And then he said, oh, and there's a third thing. He said, you have to look the lion in the eye and let him know you're a warrior. And so City Life, the shield is our legal defense of people. So people have some rights, as tenants in this city. If they're getting evicted, there's things we can do to defend them in court. We can prevent their case from being brought to court through various means. And we have a lot of lawyers who work for us pro bono who help us with the shield. So that's just the immediate sort of shielding people from harm. And we have a mass meeting every Tuesday. People come into our office and with their problem, and they come in shaking, crying. They come in with their children, with their elderly parents. And they come to the front of the room. We have this little process where we ask the new people to come to the front of the room and introduce themselves. It's very powerful. People are very scared. People are timid. People are scared. People are ashamed. They feel like it's their fault that they're losing their home. And they tell their story. And usually one of the organizers at the front of the room, helps them feel like, says to them, literally, there's no place for shame here. We're all here for you. Everybody in this room is going through it too. You're not alone. And, there's crying, there's hugging. All the people introduce themselves, and then the organizer brings out a sword, a toy sword, a big, huge, like paper mache sword, and holds it, and everybody puts their hands on it. And if there's lots of people, just touch each other, and like the energy of all of them together. And the organizer asks them, are you willing to fight to stay in your home? And people usually kind of mumble, yeah, I guess, okay, yeah. And then, our organizers gets people, no, we couldn't hear you. And, he finally gets people to shout, yes, all right, yes, I'll fight to stay in my home. And then the whole crowd says back to them, we'll fight with you. And I've probably seen this happen, 500 times. And it just makes me cry almost every time. It's just it's this ritual that helps people shift from powerlessness to solidarity. So you've come to City Life. This is not a place where you get charity. This is not where we pass the hat and raise rent for you, right?
I was just going to ask that.
We do that sometimes, on the side. We don't make it, nobody knows about it. It's private. That is not what this is about. This is about you coming in and you learning how to fight for your home. And guess what? All these people in this room are going to fight with you, and we're not going to leave you alone for this ever. And people come in feeling, as one woman told me once, she said, I came in worried and I left a warrior.
That's awesome.
I mean,
what? You can't ask for, yeah. That's it. That's organizing in one sentence right there.
Right?
Yeah.
That's it. And then over time, as you keep coming back to the meeting, you get your struggle addressed. And that could mean that you just got to meet with a lawyer, you figured out the right paperwork to fill out, you figured out how to stop them from evicting you, or it could mean that you had to go to court, then we went with you to court wearing our City Life t-shirts, showing up together. It could mean that we block your eviction, and a bunch of us go sit on the doorstep and lock arms and lock ourselves to the banister, and the police. And I have to tell you, Vince, we have a huge success rate with our eviction blockades. When the bank, like when we were blocking back in the foreclosure crisis, we would go and block evictions of homeowners. And the moving truck shows up, and the cops show up, and we're all there, and we're just saying we won't leave. You're going to have to arrest us all. And 9 times out of 10, the bank would call off the foreclosure. So it's a very successful strategy.
Can I ask you some very specific questions about this? And this is excellent because one of the campaigns that organized in United Residents of Michigan City, which is a group that I'm a member of, it wants to take on these housing issues. We're not solely a housing organization. So I think there's probably some differences there. One of the things I wanted to ask you right away, and I have several questions specific to the work you're doing with City Life as you were talking. So how do you make sure that it doesn't turn into charity? Because I feel like this is a challenge a lot of groups face. I mean, including ourselves, we've been around for a few years now, but we still get messages and calls from people. And of course, if we can, privately, we do the same thing. We help them, put them in contact with people, see if there's anyone who can drop some money for them. But we don't make it public because we don't want people to think that we're like an advocacy/charity group. How do you deal with those challenges? And you can be as specific or vague as you want, but
yeah. So here's some minutia for you. Every single meeting, mass meeting, we read our mission statement out loud in front of the group. And I mean, it can be boring as hell. I've heard that thing read 1,000 times now, but I get why it matters. People need to know what this is. And some people will walk out, honestly. Like, this isn't what I wanted. Okay, well, you know what? They can leave. So we remind people of our mission. And we also, that ritual that I described, that has a huge amount of significance and importance. Humans like rituals for one thing. I mean, they're meaningful. They demonstrate the thing that you're trying to say. So not just the verbiage of this is a solidarity organization, not a charity, that's one thing. But when you feel it, when the whole room shouts at you that they're going to not leave you alone, that's a whole, if you feel it in your body, and so that's one thing. It's just reading the mission, having a clear mission statement and reading it out loud. And, you can choose to leave if that's not cool with you, Right. But if you're curious, and, we have the free lawyers there at the meeting. And honestly, another little tactic is before you see the free lawyer, you have to hear part of the meeting. We get a lot of people in the door because they just want to talk to the lawyer and it's free. And they're like, cool, free lawyers, I'll go. We're like, okay, cool. We're glad you're here. I can't blame people. I mean, they haven't had an experience of solidarity. What are they? I mean, they don't know about this. So we're we're like, you can't just go straight in to see the lawyer. You have to kind of actually listen to some of this meeting. And in the meeting, we always just are doing, we have different presentations. We have different slideshows. We show like a little bit of news clip or something. We do skits. We just do things so people can kind of get the picture of what City Life is. Then they go in one by one to see the lawyer and then come back out. And we just hope that we're like sort of capturing and communicating to people the message. And some people, they might not come back, but a lot of people come back because they go, I want more of that. Right. I want more of what that felt like. Yep. We talked about on the left, it doesn't feel good. Like you sit through these meetings and they suck and like you end up feeling more depleted than ever before. But, it's just not true at City Life.
Right on.
I mean, it's like church in a good way.
Yeah.
I mean, people are crying, people are connected. I mean, I've seen a suicide intervention that was one of the most powerful interventions I've ever seen in my life, where somebody just said, I feel hopeless and I just don't know how to keep going. I can't keep going. She'd been fighting for her home for all this time. The stress of fighting for your home is really off the charts. It's your home, like it's your place, right? It's where you're supposed to be able to be safe and relaxed. And if you're already a marginalized person, like suffering from discrimination in all sorts of ways in this world, your home is even that much more sacred, you know?
Yep.
So she basically said, I don't know, I think about ending it all because I can't do this. And instead of riding over that, or instead of feeling like, oh, that's out of my depth, I can't do it. Our organizers are so smart and so connected and so grounded in this community. This organizer, Mary Wright, she just said, come on up here, and just gave her this amazing hug and stopped the whole meeting. And there's 80 people in the room. And she just held her, and the woman cried. And then Mary said, who here can give this woman your phone number, for when she's feeling this way? And all these people volunteered the phone number and went up to her and gave the phone number and hugged her. I mean, it's like grassroots therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have said, because of city life, their depression was through the roof. And the best antidote to the depression was to come in and fight.
Right.
Even if they lost. People say, you saved my life. Because I met family here, and I met people who would fight with me. And I want to just say, as a white person here, a lot of white people right now, especially given what's happening, are, what do I do? What can I do as a white person? How can I get involved? Oh, I'm a little nervous. I might do the wrong thing. I want to say to white people, find a way to do the work and try to keep your mouth shut a little bit, to just try to learn the lay of the land, and try not to get out in front right away. Try to be humble, try to just put your shoulder to the, plow kind of thing, and just show up and start learning, and be willing to make mistakes, and be willing to be embarrassed, ashamed of your mistakes, but to keep going back, and if you're doing the work and you get called out for making a mistake, it's going to be okay, because you've shown up, you've shown that you can do the work. No one's going to trash you. I mean, at City Life, nobody gets trashed, if you mess up. I once did a very boneheaded white person thing after a whole bunch of us had been arrested, and we were in a jail in South Boston. We were mixed white and Black and Latino people. And I was one of the first to be let out of the jail. And there was one car ferrying us back and forth to this place. And the white cops said to me, oh, go ahead and get that right. We'll just be releasing people like every 20 minutes, and then the next carload, so he advises me to just go ahead and go. And I did what he said. What a failure. Oh, what a white person failure, accepting instructions from this authority figure and thinking my Black comrades will be fine, because the cop said, he'll release them little by little, and we'll just send the car back and forth and it'll all be fine. Later on, my Black comrades, first of all, they did not get released in a timely fashion. It took hours. They weren't released till the wee hours of the morning. I should have stayed there till everybody was released. It was stupid of me to leave. And people got mad at me. People yelled at me, and were justifiably enraged at me. And I said I was sorry, and that I had learned from that experience. And we were done with that little episode. And I think that white people too often, becomes a self-flagellating thing, oh, I fucked up, I'm bad, I'm a bad person,
Right.
Oh, they hate me now, I can't show my face. No. Get over it. Yeah, admit you made a mistake, get over it, keep showing up, keep learning, keep falling on your face if you have to, get back up and come back at it. It's not going to be easy, it's going to be messy, it's going to suck sometimes. People might not always even be justified in calling you out.
Sure.
Right? That might happen too.
Sure.
Just try to deal with it. Try to be a grown-up. But if you're in struggle with people, it has a whole different quality.
Yep.
Because people know me over there. they know I've put my body on the line over and over again. They know I show up over and over. They know me. And so my racist mistake is in that context.
Right.
There's a whole me here, mm-hmm. And I'm not the sum of my racist mistakes. I'm a lot, including the racist mistakes. But, if I can be a great big grown up about it and come back in and keep going, we're all going to get to keep growing and learning and evolving, so that's my message to white people.
No, it's a great time for, I think, that lesson, because there's going to be a significant amount of people over the next however many months who are going to try and build these interracial, multiracial coalitions. And that process is a very difficult process. It's a lot more difficult than a lot of people think it is sometimes. And there's a lot of navigating emotions, people's lived experiences, people's mistakes. I think it's really good advice. I know I'm already going over the time that you've allotted for us, and so I don't want to keep you for much longer, but I would like to do something, and perhaps we don't even have to do it on air. One of the main organizers for Organized and United Residents of Michigan City, Sarah Johnson, I would almost like to put you in contact with her just privately, because she's interested in, and the RMC group has been interested in, stopping evictions. What does that look like? What does it look like to build this kind of a multiracial coalition around this issue in the city that we're in? And maybe this is something you can speak to now, and then we can sort of wrap it up with any final suggestions or advice that you have about the current situation. But one of the challenges we face here is that many of the organizers we're speaking to live in blue states and in blue cities. We live in a red city right now and a very, very red state with a supermajority trifecta control. So if you know of anyone, or if you know of any organizations who are doing the kind of work you're doing around housing, but in a context more similar to ours, I think that would be extremely helpful for us. As an organizer, how different it is. So in Indiana, illegal to raise taxes at the municipal level, illegal to raise the minimum wage above what the minimum wage is federally, illegal to have sanctuary cities, I mean, all of the sort of immediate reforms you would think of doing to provide immediate help for people. A lot of times, they're not available. And if they are, the state simply files a lawsuit and then the municipality pulls it away. Instead of going through that process over and over again, it's, I think, both challenging for us, but it also requires a certain level of creativity where we don't have the option of maybe just simply getting this law passed. That's a challenge, but it also opens the door for us to think creatively about, well, what would the alternatives be? Do you know, and like off the top of your head, do you know of any sort of tenant rights organizations? I don't even know if that would maybe what you would call your organization, but that operate in red states. And if you don't know now, cool. We could even edit out this part of the thing. If you come across any, it would be a great help to us, because we reach out to so many different groups that are doing good work. And as soon as they tell us sort of their structure, what they do, how they function, we're like, oh shit, well, we can't do that. We can't do this. It's a much different context. But anyway, yeah, just any.
Yeah, I don't know any off the top of my head, but I will say that one of the main tools City Life uses is we try to organize tenant associations in buildings. So you don't need a law for that. It's good to have tenant protection, legal protections, but if you don't have them, you can just organize associations. So what that is, it's like a union at your home. And you get the tenants to form an association just by signing, everybody could sign a letter, for example. We are forming a tenant association, sign. That's it. It's now formed.
Right.
It's not a legal entity really. But what we do is we have the tenant association write public letters to the landlord. And so the letter is public because it's CC'd to the media, the mayor, city councilors. And we say, these are the conditions that we're living in this building. These are the conditions, and you're trying to raise the rent $500 a month per apartment. And that's no joke. That's happening around here all the time.
Sure.
And it's a public shaming. I mean, and honestly, the landlord doesn't have to listen to us, but it's amazing how pressure works.
Yeah.
It's really quite effective. It always surprises us. We don't even have, sometimes we'll have only a quarter of the building organized, even less than a quarter of the building organized. You don't even need a lot more than that to actually be quite effective. And then our demand is a contract with the landlord where he or she agrees to not raise the rent more than, say, 3% a year over a 5-year period. So we win some housing stability for people. And this is in a rapidly gentrifying area, so that's a huge gain.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure what the situation is for you all there, but if that would be the demand or if it would be something about conditions or what it would be. But very powerful strategy to have a tenant association, and it helps build your base, and it helps this idea of solidarity.
2 questions real quick about the tenant organizations. And I'm sorry, but the more you speak about this, like I have very specific organizing questions. And so how is it, so in our city, we don't necessarily have that many housing complexes. What we do have is a like rapidly deteriorating old housing stock from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where you have like these houses chopped up into three or 4 units. How do you choose? How is it combined between sort of how you choose, who you choose to help in that situation, or who you choose to organize, and then also who you choose to target? Is it like if you're getting X amount of renters from this neighborhood, it's just like by default, hey, if we've got 10 or 20 people interested in this area or in this complex, then we're going to work there. Why not? Or is it that you're trying to target specific landlords within the city or within that neighborhood?
It's both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah. Sometimes we just know, like, oh, they're building a new subway station in Mattapan, therefore that's going to get gentrified immediately, right? Because right along, so we go to those big apartment buildings all around there, and we knock on doors and we say, hey, how's it going in here? And we just start meeting people, and then we hold the meeting down in the laundry room or in the foyer, and we bring the folding chairs, or in the parking lot, or, you know, we kind of try to start building. And a lot of people sort of feeling, well, there's nothing wrong. Everything's fine. No, they're not raising my rent right now. You know, and we sort of let them know this is what's going to be coming down the road at you. And sometimes people are just reluctant. And then about a year later, somebody will call us and say, oh my God, I just got, you know, $500 rent increase or something. So sometimes it's that, you know, it's in the city with gentrification happening in these certain kinds of ways. It's pretty easy to know how to target buildings.
Right.
For you all, there might be a different kind of set of things that you'd be addressing. But by setting up tenant associations, you're creating a horizontal grassroots network of people that are going to use solidarity with each other to improve their living conditions. And that's political, it's revolutionary, it's a mobilized group that's ready. You know, we just won a very important law in Massachusetts. There was a moratorium on evictions. And one of the reasons we won it is because we have a mobilized base of tenants because of the work that we've been doing all these years at City Life.
Right.
You know, we could win that law. It's not a great law. It's not what we want in the end, but it's been hella positive to be able to say to people, you actually can't get evicted during this virus, you know, during this state of emergency.
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean,
God,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
absolutely.
People call just absolutely at their wits' end. You know, what am I going to do? I'm going to get evicted during and you know, no, you cannot it's illegal for the landlord to evict you right now. So you need to save your money for food, medicine, whatever you need. Don't pay your rent.
Yeah.
Of course, the rent's going to come due once the state of emergency is over, and that's going to be the next battle, right?
And then that comes back to the work you do by blocking the evictions themselves. No, I really, if my one favor I would ask of you, because I've already asked you to talk to me on the phone twice within 1 week, that wasn't scheduled. So that's you're probably like tired of seeing my face or hearing my voice. The only favor I would ask of you is if you would please talk to one of our members from RMC. I think that they would our organization would greatly benefit from learning lessons from what y'all have already done. So
I would be honored to, and I would love to share any resources we have with
Very
you.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts right now? Say we'll have you back in the future, but any final thoughts on sort of what's happening, keep people's spirits high, advice to those who are just getting involved or even those who are been involved and reactivated right now?
So something happened to me one time when I witnessed a police shooting of a young African-American man who had driven a bus off. And They shot him. They had him in the ambulance, but the ambulance wasn't moving because the ambulance was surrounded by police cars. And when I figured out and they were doing CPR on him in the back of the ambulance, but I could see why the ambulance wasn't moving. So I went up to the closest police officer and I said, why don't you move your car? Because this ambulance should be getting to the hospital because there's a young man in there who's getting CPR. And the cop said, I don't know whose car it is. It's not mine. Well, why don't you figure it out? And and I went through this whole thing where I just kind of escalated with this cop about, you need to do this and you need to do it now. And then pretty soon there's more cops around. And pretty soon I was encircled by cops and I was basically raging at them, move your car, move your car. And I was in that state that you get and my partner was down there with me, and all of a sudden I felt him just grab me by the collar and just pull me out of the circle of cops, And he says, you're just going to get yourself arrested. And I was like, well, we have to do something. We can't. So what if I get arrested? We have to do. And he said, well, it's not going to do you any good it's not going to do him any good in the ambulance if you get arrested. And I was like, well, what are we going to do? And he said, we can move this civilian car. We'll just pick it up and put it on the sidewalk. And I was like, you can pick up a car? I didn't even know you could pick up a car. Apparently, Vince, you can pick up a car if you have enough people. Did you know that?
I did know that.
I did not know that. I was like, wow, you can pick up a car? Okay, what do we do? So we got about 20 people and we just picked up the car, a civilian car, not the police car, and moved it out of the way. As soon as we moved out of the way, the ambulance drove away. And I looked at my partner and I was like, wow. He was thinking and I wasn't thinking at that point. I was down the rabbit hole of, I'm right, you're wrong, somebody's dying. And what mattered to me more than anything was that I was right and they were wrong. That was what mattered. And it actually wasn't that I was thinking well about the guy in the ambulance. But Paul, my partner, was able to think, thank God. And so we did that. And so I just feel like that's a story for our times, It is that bad. It is that bad times a million. And yet we have to look at each other and we have to be strategic and we have to remember what we're trying for here and not, just the moral that we're on the moral high ground, and not just to rage against the machine, the authorities, the people in power in front of us who appear to be causing the harm. And so if we can keep doing that, I have always felt like the way I've made it this far in my life and the way I hope to keep going is to have good people around me,
Yep.
And that's, if you can keep good people around you who will keep you accountable, who grab you by the collar when necessary, and it will help you keep thinking, and not losing your mind. That's what we all need. Try to give that to each other and remember what we're trying to do.
Excellent. That is about as good of advice as you can give. So, or get, for those of you who are watching and listening. So thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Vince. It's great to talk to you.
It's good to talk with you. Cynthia Peters is an activist, writer, organizer, and editor who lives in Boston, Massachusetts. She organizes with City Life Vida Urbana. This has been Park Media. I'm your host, Vince Emanuele, and we'll see you soon. Hey, thank you for watching and listening. If you think this program is worth a pack of cigarettes or a cheeseburger, you could become a Patreon for as little as $3 a month. The link is available at our website, parkmedia.org. That's PARCmedia.org. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Also, you could find us on Instagram at Park Media, Facebook at Politics, Art, Roots, Culture, and you could find me on Twitter at Vince Emanuele.